So, in our last video, we a little bit discussed about the execution in Cypress and converting the code that we are developing in JavaScript into machine code and executing in the runtime environments. And we start discussing about the differences between TypeScript and JavaScript, and we told that TypeScript is just a wrapper of JavaScript, and it is basically utilizing the types for the objects. So what does it mean? Let's a little bit further discuss the details of the typed approach in TypeScript. Actually, I have some notes here. Let me find them. Yeah, so here we can see that JavaScript basically was developed and built in 1995, and TypeScript was developed by Microsoft in 2012. And I had noted that it supports both static and dynamic typing. So I want to show how types look like. For example, I have a class here to define some types, my types file here, and here I have an example. In this one, I have a query object, and I know what kind of attributes I can pass as arguments of this query. I may have what, location, and radius fields or the attributes when I'm doing a query, and I know what type of assignments I can do to these fields. For example, what can be a string, location can be a string, and radius can be a number. Whenever I try to make a number assignment to location, I will have a notification, I will have an error, and I will know something is going in the wrong direction. And I can see that all these fields are optional, so none of them are mandatory to build and construct a query. So I can use any of them or maybe all of them to build my query. And I can, one more note, I can use interfaces as well. And what is the difference between interface and type in terms of defining the types in TypeScript? Basically, they are acting in the same way in most of the cases, but there are very slight differences, like the interfaces can be defined more than once in the same scope, but the types can be declared and defined only once. But other than that, most of the time they are acting in the same way. Their behavior almost same in most of the cases. So I want to show how it works in JavaScript and TypeScript. For example, let me create a new file here. This is my JavaScript file, and I want to start a new test here. I have to define a suite, which is represented by describe in Cypress. Let me a little bit zoom in, and inside I have to pass my title. This is my suite, and I'll pass a function. Here I'm creating an arrow function, and I'll talk about arrow functions later, but now let's keep as is, and let's add a test case inside my suite. It's represented by IT. And similarly, I want to add a title to my test. And I can pass some test configs. For now, let's keep it empty. And again, I'm adding a arrow function here. Cool, I'm ready. So now I want to make some assignments here. For example, let's first create a new variable and then make an assignment here. First of all, I'm assigning a string to this variable, and then I will assign a number to the same variable. So actually I dynamically do an assignment, and everything looks straightforward, everything looks smooth, there is no problem. And let's do the same with TypeScript. This is my TypeScript file, and I want to just copy the test that I created here. But let's do the assignment. from scratch. First create my variable with a string type, first of all. And then let's try to assign a number to this variable. So now what I have is, first of all, it notifies me that I'm declaring this variable, but it is not used at all. So do I really need this? I have to think about it. But I have another error here, which is type number is not assignable to type string. So TypeScript already knows that it was assigned with a string value. So the type of a variable is string, but I'm trying to assign a number in the next line. So, and even to improve the visibility, I can just declare the type here as well. It will be just a string. So just after creating my variables, I can declare the type here. So in this way, I can already understand whenever I'm doing my assignments after the objects are created. So I guess this is all about the type approach used in TypeScript. But other than that, we can talk about modules as well, because I guess that was my next notes here. Yes. Because module management is important. Whenever we are implementing some complex and complicated algorithms, there will be lots of different duplication. Like sometimes we will be creating some objects and maybe some functions in some classes, and we will need them in some other classes, in some other spec files, just to avoid duplication. So for this purpose, we will use modules. So we have to export some objects or some functions or some types, some different code that we are developing into different classes or different spec files, and then after importing them into different scopes, then we can start using them. So how can we do that? Let's see them. I guess it should be here in my notes. Yes. So what we can do is, first of all, we can use the Node.js standard, which is like exporting some modules in this way, in this representation, module that exports that the function name. And then while we want to use them in another scope, we just import them by doing an assignment by calling the relevant class under which it was defined. But there is one more standard, which was the standard of JavaScript. It is called as EMCAScript, or just the initials as ES. And there are different versions of ES, ES5 or ES6. And this has a different representation. Something like, first of all, we export functions in the classes that we are developing. And then in the other classes where we want to import, we just, instead of calling require function, as we do in CommonJS modules, now we are just calling the import with the relevant naming that we have done in the other classes, in the implementation that we have performed in the other class. And one more thing that we have to know is there are different types of exports. For example, the default export or the named export. Default export can be only once in a class. So it is basically just can be called once, but named exports can be called more than once, multiple times in a class. We can see some examples here. So I have only one default function here, but other than that, I may have, in this case I have only one, but I may have more than one named exports in this way. What else we can talk about this? I guess maybe we can have a look at the history of the versions. So I guess I have a reference here. So in this page, let me open it here. We can see, first of all, before these standards were in place, like the CommonJS or the EMCAScript standards, developers were just using the immediately invoked function expressions, IIFE approach. But then these standards are developed, the standard for the Node.js and the standard for the JavaScript. And in JavaScript, standard, which is AS, first of all, it was the AS5 version, and then we have the ES6 version. And what is difference here? In ES5, we just had the variable assignments with var keyword, but in ES6 we start using let and const to define some different scope assignments, and of course we have the array functions that I just used in the implementation that I have done here. So this is a type of array function. So this was introduced with the ES6, which was introduced in 2015. So first CommonJS and ES5 were introduced in 2009, and then after 6 years, 2012, we have the ES6 as a JavaScript standard, and we have now let, const, and var keywords to create some different objects or different variables, and we have the array functions. And yeah, in the next classes we will discuss more about array functions and the other scope management issues.